Welcome everybody, this is Awais back with the next part of IONIC workshop series in which we're creating this expense tracker application. So this is going to be the 7th part of this tutorial series. So here is a playlist. I'm going to drop the link for this into the description of this video. You can follow along. So this is going to be the 7th part of our complete mobile application development walkthrough using IONIC framework part 5. Here probably I need to change the name of it. Now before we start the video, let's take a look at what we have so far in this series. So here's an application. We got this today, date picker, category amount. So basically this is an expense tracker application. I can add expense. Click on that plus button. I'm going to add an expense. Let's just say $20. I'll say this is the test expense, and then we can select the type of it. So let's just say support. Click on add. Here's a debugger that I've got to remove. Let's see our application. Now we go back to the dashboard page, and here we got $20 and then description of that, and then a date, and then support. So here we can add expenses depending on the date as well. So I'm going to click on plus button, actually change the date to date 7, and let's click on plus button, and I'm going to change the amount to 50, test expense, and I can select the, let's just say dining out. Let's click on add. We have a debugger. So here we got date 7 and then date 8. Now in this video, our agenda would be to filter out these expenses depending on the current date. Also, I've set up a repository for this project. Let me take you to my GitHub account where you can clone this project. It's a complete open source application which you can download and contribute as well. I would like to mention a couple of things. This video series has taken a lot of time to create, and if you think this video series has helped you in any way and you want to help me out for putting out this kind of content, there's a PayPal link in the description of this video. You can use that to donate whatever, $1 or $2. This is going to help me to keep putting out this kind of content. Also, if you need any kind of development services, let me know. You can send me an email if you need any kind of help in regards to that. Now let's get started with part 7 of this tutorial series. Open up a terminal, and I'm going to type IONIC serve command. It's going to run our server, and here is our application running here. I'm going to go to application and clear the current data and refresh this page, and here you go. We got our application running without any data. Now this install date gets stored when you initialize your application for the first time. And the goal for this video is to create an expenses depending on a date and filter them out in the dashboard page. So here is our Trello board, and I've worked on this create storage service with some helper function. That's in a production, fixed UI. Okay, that's done as well. Add routing module. So a lot of things which are developed, I'm going to put them into production. Create a demo expense, create get and status for expense property. Yep, that's all good. Required configuration is done as well. Fixing all the routes. Yep, all done. So here we got a dashboard UI, store expense according to date. So this is the task that we're still working on from the previous video. So let's get to it. So I'm gonna go back to the code, and here first of all we can we're gonna do some modification here. Right now, whenever we store our expense, that gets started with this add expense component. Here's a init create expense function, and here we create an expense from the form that creates the new date. So here's a selected date coming from a date and time service. And then we are going to say if the expense is created null, then we can get that done in like the current date and time, which would be like today's date. So this is basically an if statement when your app gets initialized for the first time. Then we call this action service create expense, and we're passing that expense. So let's go to that function, and here I'm going to get rid of the debugger, and then we get this expense and we're going to store that to local storage. Now here we have a promise, so I'm going to use that promise. I'm going to say once that gets stored, which will return nothing, then inside this I'm going to call this data service set expense to expense. And I'm going to get rid of this line, and we need to get rid of that as well and return this. Okay, let's save it. Now we're gonna go and follow this bit. So save expense to local. Here, when we save expense to local, it gets that date and time for a key, and it tracks that expense dot created on. So whatever the date will come from an expense, it will create a date for us, and then that would be the key. I'm going to get rid of this debugger as well. Then after that, it creates today's expense array, or I'm gonna just rename this to make it more modular. So I'm just gonna call it expenses. Okay, and that will be an array of expense interface. We initialize it with empty array, and then we say get from local storage. We get the key, and that will return us expense in the array. And we are going to push the new expense into an array. Once that's done, then we can call this dot save to local storage with the key and expenses. Give it a try. I'm going to click on this plus button, and then I'm going to type an expense, and then select a type, click on add, and we can see an expense here. But when I look at this application local storage data, I'm going to refresh. I don't see that expense there, which means if I refresh our application, that expense is gone. So what's going on here? Let's take a look at this code. So here we're creating expenses in an array. We're getting it from local storage. We have a local variable parameter, which is basically getting returned from a local storage. And we're saying expenses.push array. Okay, that's the problem here. We're gonna change some variable name. So here I'm gonna call it expense list, and I'm gonna push that expense list. Actually, expense to expense list. Here we're gonna use expense list there, and then list there as well. So we're going to store expense list, not expenses. So I'm gonna save this with. We can see that our application server is running. Let's go to here, and I'm going to click on this plus button. Let's have an expense 30, have a description, type add, and here we got debugger actually. So let's just resume it, and I'm gonna go to application, and there we go. We got an expense getting stored with the key now. So that's all good. I'm gonna try going back to the code, and I'm gonna stop this debugger by removing it. Also, because this is an async function, we're gonna have to return this bit from here. And let's get rid of this 0. Okay, and let me just close some files here so it's more cleaner to see. Okay, so now we can see I can add more expenses. Like, what are the expenses that I'm gonna add? Click on the sports, click add. There's another one there. Now we're getting the same key, but 2 keys are getting stored here. Okay, let's refresh, and then here we see the data is still there. Now we've selected this date 9. We want to add an expense depending on a different date. So I'm going to click on this date and select a date as 8. So here we got this value coming here as well. We're going to have to fix this. Go back to our code, and I'm going to go to dashboard component now. And here you can see that we got this function change selected date, set current date to today date. It's a little bit confusing here. We got this today date and selected date. Okay, I would like to get rid of this today date completely and just work with selected date. Okay, so for that, if we look at today's date, I'm gonna have to get rid of from here and get rid of from here as well. Actually, let's just change this to selected date. Okay, and then we are going to get rid of selected date here. That's a today's date. Let's get rid of that as well. And now I'm going to go to date and time service, and we want to get rid of today's date there. So here's a getter and setter for today date. Let's get rid of them, and also a property here, we got rid of it. Now if I take a look at our application, there will be an error. It says component property today date does not exist on date and time service. So what we need to do is go to dashboard HTML, and in our date picker, here's a today's date. So I'm going to change this to selected date. Next error we're seeing in terminal, it's saying app component.ts file has the properties today date. So let's open up app component.ts file, and here we got this date and time to this is equal to this. So I'm going to change this to selected date. Okay, now we don't have any errors. If we take a look at our application, I'm going to refresh the page. We're still getting that data, and I'm going to click on today. That's fine. Click on a date. I'm going to select this date 8, and now if I add any expense, let's just say this amount, select the type, click on add, and there you go. We have a local storage showing us that there's an expense added according to the selected date. If I refresh the application, we should have this date, and we should only see the data for that particular date. Now we're gonna create an event. When I change the date, this should update the data of dashboard. So let's do that next. Let's go to the code, and we are going to go to the dashboard page, and here we have a function change selected date. Now there may be a modification that we will need to do depending on what we required so far. So right now here it's saying change selected date, which is like this dot date and time service dot selected date is equal to this bit coming from our date picker. Also the selected date equal to date and time service create this. Okay, that's all good. Now within this function, we want to update our dashboard data. So here is a subscription happening. We want to update this observable, and we push the new data there. But before, here's a selected date. Selected date is too many places that we are actually using this selected date. So we're gonna have to figure out what we need, what we don't need. So if I get rid of this bit, okay, and let's save the file, and we should not see any error because that was when this Angular lifecycle hook, which gets initialized at the component initialization time. So we don't need that there. Change selected date, we require date and time service selected date to be updated, and the current local selected date to be updated. That's all good. Set current date to this bit. Yep, this is where our we need to set that as, we need to set this current date for selected date as well. So to fix this problem, we are actually going to create another observable for selected date. So I'm gonna do another subscription like object. So here we're gonna move this down, and here I'm gonna say date subscription. Okay, and this would be behavior subject, and that would be a type date. All right, and then we're gonna have the subscription happening for that as well. So we say this dot date subscription equal to this dot data service or date and time service, and then we say dot subscribe to this particular date. Okay, so first of all, let's go to our date and time service, and here we have a selected date. I'm going to change this to behavior subject, and type would be date. In the constructor function, I'm going to say this dot underscore selected date is equal to new behavior subject, and the date would be, let's just say this dot get current date and time. Okay, that would be the initial value from here. Okay, that's good now, and we are going to, there are some errors now, so let's not worry about it now. Headers and setter, we're gonna get rid of them because that's not required anymore. It's not it's not a normal property anymore. So we got this, and we're gonna go to dashboard component, and here we are going to subscribe to that. So similarly, if we look at our data service, we have this, subscription, set expenses, and get expenses. So we're gonna create another subscription like. So right below our constructor function, we can say get selected date subscription, and that would be, let me just see, what do we have in our data service? So that's like a promise. Actually not, that's a behavior subject. So we go to date and time, and this should return behavior subject date, and we're gonna return this dot underscore selected date. That's going to be our subscription. Yep, that's looking good. Now first, let's go and fix some stuff in app component. Now when we create a behavior subject, we don't really need to set this date on initialization time. So we got rid of this bit, and now we're gonna go to dashboard component, and here we're gonna use get date and time subscription, and then we do a subscribe, and that would be a next, and that a value, and then we got this error and complete function. I'm gonna copy this from here so we don't have to type it again. And here we are going to say date coming as date, and now we're gonna set this dot selected date equal to date. Now here we are seeing an error saying selected date is behavior subject. Now if you take a look at our data service, we are returning this expense as behavior subject. So if we go to dashboard component and we see an example here, it says, okay, expenses are not behavior subject, so that's fine. We're just going to say set the date. Here we got the selected date to selected date. Let's get rid of this bit as well. Okay, and install date should be fine, but now we got the current date. Now we're gonna have to fix some errors within the dashboard page. If I take a look at this, it says change selected date. It's not there anymore, so let's not worry about that. Save it, and then we got this another expense error, selected date does not exist on date time. Okay, so we're gonna go to add expense, and here is the here's our basically that. Now to fix this bit, we're gonna go to date and time service, and I'm going to create a getter, get selected date, and that should return date. Okay, so we can say return this dot selected date dot get value, and that should be async. And we're gonna take a look at the date, the service. So that's returning async function, and it's running a promise. Okay, we could return an observable, but promise is good enough. So we're gonna do a promise returning date, and we can use await here. So make sure that we get this. Okay, so I think it's redundant here, so we don't need await. Now I'm going to use this get selected date. Okay, now we don't see any error. Let's hope that our application is still working with observable. I'm going to clear out this data. Let's refresh our application, and here we got this install date, which is set to now, and I'm going to go and click on plus button and add an expense. Let's just say 30, And let's just do this and then go select support, click on that, and here we got this bit. Now we got this thing stored, but here we have this invalid date. So the date is actually invalid. Now let's take a look at after we actually do debugs. So we created this date, get selected date, and this is returning get value from the date. Okay. Now initially what it was returning, if I take a look at the history of this function, right click, go to Git and click on show history for that. Now initially it was saying get current date and time, which was like, okay, that's fine. And then it was like a selected date, that's fine. Now this should have a current date, that shouldn't be a problem. So what we need to do is do a debugger here. I'm gonna click on debugging here and then create expense, and then I'm going to do a debugger here, save to local storage, and I'm going to do a debugger here, and then debugger here, and let's just do a debugger here as well. Okay, let's go ahead and try our application now. I'm going to clear out the data. Let's refresh. We got that there. It's install date. Click on add. Click on add. Now we got the debugger activated. Now I'm going to hide the terminal so we could see the debugger. So here the credit on is undefined. Now the credit on has become zone aware promise. Okay, that's the problem here because we created that as promise. So now if I take a look at an expense, we got this, but this is actually an expense. So we fixed that problem right here. So I'm going to stop the debugger by, just letting it go. And we're going to go to add expense. And here we need to subscribe, or we need to get this dot then to get the data from that. So I'm going to go and say, this is going to be an async. So we can say, this dot date and time service dot then, which will return a date. Okay, and then here we are going to say if expense dot thing is not right, we're going to move that here, and then we need to do dot then function. And then within then, because it's returning nothing, then we can actually pass that bit in. And we need the error here. Let's get rid of this bit now. Now I'm going to save the file and let's see if the compiled successfully or not. Now we can do a debugger here. Okay. Let's just, for the readability, I'm going to move the then down here as well. Okay. And we need to fix this bit as well. So that has to be set to date. Okay, that's actually looking good. Yeah, it's actually looking good now. We don't really need to check this if, but we'll leave that for now. Okay, now I'm going to refresh the application, but first I'm going to go to debugger. I'm going to click on this button. It says view breakpoints. So here we have all the breakpoints there. I'm going to actually stop this breakpoint by clicking on this button, mute breakpoints. I'm going to mute it and let's give it a shot. Go to the application. I'm going to clear the data and let's refresh again. Click on this plus button. Click on add, and there we go. We got the date, and then we got an expense there as well. So I'm going to add a couple more expenses. Okay, so it's all good now. We got this subscription happening in the dashboard page. If I click on this date and click on done, the date would be set to 8. So on this event, I would like to filter out this data. So for that, let's just hide this terminal, hide the debugger for now. We're gonna go to the dashboard page, and here we are, changing the date here. So here's a selected date equal to this bit. We don't really need to do that because this is not actually what we wanted. So we go to date and time service. Here we got this get, but we need to create a setter as well. So I'm going to use an async function, set selected date. Okay, and this requires date, and that can be a date or can have a string. Now this is going to return promise void, and I'm going to use basically this is going to return this dot selected date dot emit. Okay, not return, but this dot selected date dot. Now here we should have saying a next function, which will basically push the date in. Now if that comes in as a string, so what we need to do is we need to create the date object from a string, or we can use just date directly. So for that, I'm going to use a type of date equal to string. Let's just say string, and then if that's the case, then we need to create a new date. So we can use one of the function create a date from string. So we can use this dot create a date from string, and we can pass in a date. Otherwise we can just say just a date. Okay, now I'm going to save this bit, and let's see if the compiler compiled successfully. And here we got this selected date. I'm going to go to data service and see how we emitting that. So here we got that return. So let's go back to date and time, and here we're gonna do a bit of return. Now this might be confusing for some people, but yeah, what we can do here is we can just create a date d equal to, and I'm gonna just move this bit, cut this, and then paste it here for easy readability, and we could log that as well. Now I'm going to use a logger here, and I'm gonna open up Debugger, and I'm gonna unmute all the breakpoints. I'm gonna click on this bit, it's gonna view me all the breakpoints. So I'm going to actually get rid of all of the breakpoints. We're just gonna leave that a date and time service breakpoint, which is this one. Let's go to the application, let's refresh. Actually, we need to call this function on the dashboard page. So here we got this date and time selected. I'm going to call this dot date and time service dot set, and then we can pass in a value there. Okay, I'm going to return this, and let's go and try it out. So if we go to console, I'm gonna change the date to 8, and we should have a debugger now. So D is a type of date now. Okay, that's all good. So we know that if the type is set to string or not. We can actually verify that by logging console.log, and I use type of date, and just resume our application. Now I'm gonna go to console, and I'm gonna change the date to, let's just say this, and here we got this as a string. So that's all good, we got this covered. If you're okay with the TypeScript, you could actually put this bit right inside this. For me, it's easily readable, so I can have like a one-line thing there. So that should be it. Now once we emit the new date, we are going to go to the subscription of date in a dashboard page. So here is our selected date, coming date. So I'm gonna log, I'm gonna check the date whenever we have a new value coming in. Okay, also I'm gonna open up the breakpoints, and I'm going to get rid of this breakpoint as well. No need for that. It's just gonna stop us. Let's refresh the page, and now here we got the date coming from our observable behavior subject. I'm gonna change the date, so I'm gonna go to date 7, done, and we got this date 7. If I go to date 5, I go here, I get date 6. Click on today, and the date should be today's, but it's not emitting, so we need to work on this function as well. So let's minimize our terminal. We go to this function, set current date to today. So for that, we are going to just pass in the current date. So I'm going to get rid of this line, and I'm going to say this dot date and time service dot set selected date to a new date. Okay, for now this is fine. If you really want to use a data service, date and time service, so we can use this dot date and time service dot get current date and time. That should be it as well. So let's take a look at that function now. If I go and change the date to 6, okay, and I'm going to click on today, and that makes the date back to 9. Now, depending on this, we need to filter out our data. For that, let's go back to the code, and here we'd like to modify our dashboard component.ts file, also some modification in our data service. So here we are actually grabbing one expense and we're pushing that into this expenses array list. So instead of doing that, I would like to take this approach where in the constructor function, I get today's expenses from local storage and then set this sort of expenses to a value, which basically becomes this expenses. So if I go change this name, and that would be easy to read. Okay. Now we're going to go to this subscription here. I'm going to change this to say whatever that expenses comes in, and I'm expecting expense interface and array type. Okay, now you can see there's a lot of error. It says a type of next expense interface wide, which is not assignable to this. So that's fine, we'll fix this. So we're gonna go to a data service first. So go to data service. So first of all, this will change the name to expenses. Then we're gonna change this bit to array. Okay, oops, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna add an array, enter continue editing, and that's it. Oops, it actually not doing that. So I'm gonna do expense interface. I'm gonna change that to expense interface array. So let's just replace this bit, replace this. We're gonna go up to this one and replace this one as well. I'm actually going to just manually replace this. Okay, now we fix pretty much this dashboard component error as well, because it's going to return this expenses, not actually one expense. Okay, and then we got this data service. We will have to emit the expenses. So for that, we're going to find out where this set expenses or emit expenses function is used. So I'm going to right click and say find usage, and here we're using this in our data service, that's here, and also that's about it. So instead of using it here, I would like to actually use this storage service to emit that event. So I'm going to get rid of this bit from here, and let's just use this then and then catch, leave them empty now. And I'm going to go to storage service, and here we're using data time service. I'm going to fix the indentation first. I'm going to inject print private data service, and now we are going to use that data service to push that. So here we're saying this dot saves local storage, and I'm going to use then. Once that's stored, which is not returning anything, then we can use this dot data service dot set expenses to expenses here, and this would be actually expense list, not expenses. So here we're gonna go look at this function, and that's it. It's returns promise. So we'll do return. Okay, and now we're gonna have to test our application if it's everything is running. So now I've got refreshed the application. Here we're getting this. If I go and change the date to, let's just say 7, done. And now the date gets changed, but the data still stays there. Update expenses depending on the date. We need to trigger an event or emit the new expenses through our behavior subject. So here we have this event change selected date, right? So I'm going to do dot then, okay, and then because it's going to return void, I guess. So if I look at this, it's returning void. That's fine. Then we are going to, once that's done, then we are going to this dot data service dot get expenses, and in terms of get expenses, we're just returning the current value. So that's not what we want to do. What we want to do is emit a new expenses depending on the date. So we need to grab those expenses and then, emit them as well. So for that, we're gonna go to storage service, and it says get expenses from a local storage. We have an action service. We might use this one. So it says get today's expenses, and I'm gonna use this async function. Says get expenses by date from local. Okay, and that will return promise expense interface in an array, and we need to have a parameter date, and that would be and then here we're going to return await this dot storage service dot get expenses from local, and that will take a date. So we can pass in this date object there, and once that's done, it's going to return the local expenses. And we can also do emit right here. So it's going to return expenses, and we can say this dot data service dot set expenses, and we can pass in these expenses. Reason why we're seeing this error is because of our promise. So here we don't want to return anything from here. Okay, so that's not going to return anything. It's going to return promise void, and that will basically saves us from this error. I'm going to use this function, go to dashboard component, and here once we grab that, I'm going to call this dot action service. So do we have action service in Unity? Yep, we do. So I'm going to use this dot action service dot get expenses from local, and we can pass in that value, and the value is basically a date. So we can say this dot selected date. Now another thing that we probably improve right here, we want to change the name of this function. So we can say, go to action service, and here we have get expenses by date from local, or we can change this to emit expenses, because that's what it's actually doing, right? So it's going to have a name, emit. Okay, and now in our dashboard we should see the name should be changed, right? So now everything is compiled successfully. I'm going to change the date to, let's just say 7, and once we get that, data still stays there. So here is our function. We got set emit, and it will emit the expenses, and we got this subscription happening right here. Okay, so I'm going to log these expenses here. Let's check if we actually getting these expenses emitted. I'll save the file. And then I'm going to refresh this page. I'm going to change the date to 8, and we're getting this as null. So once that's null, because we see that there is no expense with that date, we should remove these values. This should go away. So here is saying not null, then push it. Okay, so if that's null, I'm going to change this to if going to use this else here. Say this dot expenses equal to an empty array. Okay, now let's see if that actually works out for us. So we got an expenses here, we got this null. I'm gonna change the date to 8, and there we go, we got rid of those expenses. If I go back and change the date to, let's just say 9, we got today, and date is back to 9, it should have that data there. So let's fix that as well. So he's got today. I'm going to simply copy this bit and paste that here as well. Okay, now here we need to use this dot selected date. Actually, not selected date, but we need to use today's date. So we can say this dot date and time service dot get current date and time. Okay, let's go back to our code, and here I'm going to change the date to 8 and go back to today's date, and we get the data back. Okay, so things are working out, but one thing that we need to fix here is when I click on this date 7 and I click on this date picker again, I don't see that 8, 9. That's the problem there. So for that, we need to go to dashboard HTML in here, because we have this selected date set to this, and that's not right. So I'm going to actually change this bit to say today's date. So this dot date and time service dot get current date and time. Okay, and then we can use this ISO string right here, and let's see if that works out. Okay, it doesn't work out because expression has changed after it was previously the max this, current value is this, so that would cause an issue. So I'm gonna refresh the page, click here, and if I go to 7, what doesn't work, I cannot select the date 9. So in this case, what we need to do is just on the initialized time, we can create a current date and time like right on the fly. So here we got this dot today date. No need to actually have anything special about this. Actually, I'm gonna use this dot get date and time service. No, it's not going to do that. So we need to use, actually not here, my bad. we go to dashboard component. So inside this constructor function, I'm going to use let's just say today date. That would be a type date, and I'm going to use this dot today date equal to this dot date and time service get current date and time. Okay, and then we can use that bit here, today's date. Let's save the file. Let's go here. Now we should not see any error. I go click on date, cannot read the property of year. I get it, you need the ISO. So now this should not cause any issues. So we go to 7. I can see it's 7 there. Click here. I can go to 8. Okay. And if you really want to go today, click on today. It will bring you the data. Now I'm going to change the date to 8. Okay, change to 7. Click on plus button, and I'm going to add an expense. Suppose add. Now we got that expense added. I'm going to look at this. There's an expense for this. So if I go add another expense, let's say $60, and then we can select the mortgage, and there you go, we got another expense. Click on today, and we get that today's expenses. If I go and change the date to 7, done. Nah, it's not triggering. So if I go to 6 and then I go to 7, it should trigger. Now if I click on today, I need to make sure that selected date is set to 9 as well. So let's do that. I'm going to go to the dashboard page, and here is a function get current to selected date. So I'm going to say this dot date and time service selected date to this. We don't really need to do that anymore because we are not, triggering. So I'm going to just use this dot selected date equal to this dot today date. Okay, that's about it. Let's go here. Now if I go and change this to, let's say 7, we got this data. If I go and change this to 8, no data, click on today, we're getting this. And then here the value should be something different, something right. Let's go here, go to dashboard page, and here it's time for us to add a value. That would be today date. To fix that issue, I would like to change the value to selected date and change the max to selected date as well, because selected date would initially be today's date. Also go to dashboard page, and I don't think so we need to have this today date anymore. So we can simply have this selected date to work for us. Let's save the file and let's go and test it out. Now here we got this 9 March, and I'm gonna change the date to, let's just say 6. And here we got no data. If I click on today and we get the data, we can also see the date is changed here as well. So far our application is running. So if I click on 7, I get that data coming in from a local storage depending on this date. Okay, so far our application is looking good. We go back to the code. Before we wrap up this video, I would like to run our application in iOS emulator. If you take a look at Project Explorer, we have this iOS. I would like to show you how you can add if you haven't added any platform. If you're using Windows, you can only add Android platform. If you're on a Mac, then you can use both Android and iOS. So I'm going to use IONIC capacitor, add iOS. Once I do that, it's saying iOS platform already exists. So that's fine. I'm going to use IONIC capacitor add Android. And now it's going to generate an Android project for me, and we will see another folder named Android appearing here. And once that's done, then I will show you how you can run iOS application on iOS emulator. So here we got an Android folder now. To run this automatically, I would like to use a command IONIC capacitor run iOS. Okay, it's going to do a few things. It's going to build our IONIC application, then it's going to compile it. Once the compilation process is done, it's going to open up Xcode and run our application in one of the emulator, or if you have connected your iPhone or iPad to the Mac, then it will choose from there. So let's just wait for this to finish, and we should be seeing Xcode opening automatically, because this command opens up Xcode automatically. So here we go. It's saying opening the Xcode workspace. Now I'm using this PyCharm in full screen, so this is why it's going to open Xcode into a different virtual desktop. So here is my application, expense tracker. I'm using this, my personal team, and using automatically managed signing. Okay, so first thing, if you're on Xcode, go to this, click on app, go to signing, and select your team, and then it will automatically manage your profile provisioning profile and signing certificate as well. Now it says build succeeded. Then I can choose one of the device here, or one of the emulator. I'm going to click on this iPhone 8 emulator. Let's click on play, and then it's going to open iPhone 8 emulator and we'll run our application in that. So let's wait for that to finish. Usually, as you probably hear, a lot of noise coming out because Mac is actually blowing right now. I'm using PyCharm and also opening up emulator and with Xcode, so it's kind of struggling. I've got a MacBook Pro with 8 gigs, so it's actually taking a bit of time to run this, and fan is actually blowing. Anyways, we just wait for this application to start up. As you can see, the output in Xcode. And there you go. This is how our application is looking in iPhone 8. I'm going to click on this plus button. It will open up this model. I'm going to add this 50 and then do a description. Select a type, click on add, and there you go. We got this, expense adding. So if I click on date, let's change the date to 7, and there you go. We got log as null. Click on today. We got this data coming in from local storage. Okay, so our application is looking good, and in this video that's about it. I'm going to show you how you can modify the UI in the next video. So I'll see you guys in the next one.